It's only up from here.
Welcome to The Verbal Process, a collection of conversations between two individuals processing life and faith so as to engage knowledge for the sinner, reality for the saint, and the cultivation of truth for all.
I just saw my therapist. She talked about feelings. She said that I'm scared of it. I made a habit of.
Brother, how are you? How are you, sir?
Fantastic.
Right.
Doing
On.
fantastic.
Dude, I am again so excited to be talking to you guys. If you are tuning in, welcome to the Verbal Process Dialogue number 2. This is the first kind of real episode. We are calling this series, Have You Lost Your Mind? I think as we're diving into some of the kind of baseline foundational aspects of I would say like philosophy and theology. We're just wanting to kind of lay a groundwork for it. And again, this is like we mentioned in the last episode, this is nothing to do with us coming from a place of being educated on these things, but hence the title of our podcast, The Verbal Process. We are just simply talking and processing through these things in hopes that we would come to further cultivate truth for our own lives, for us to be able to walk out. So I hope as you're joining us, the questions we're asking, the things we're going through, you're also asking of yourselves, thinking through for yourselves. And yeah, so stoked for today's conversation. I can't wait to hear what you have to say, dude. I'm so excited.
Same for you, man. There's so much on the table, and I think it's going to be hard to simplify things. Not even so much like trying to explain it to people, because it's like we're still wrestling with these concepts ourselves, but also just in general, the sense of like, man, like there's not enough time to fully discuss these things as well. So it's good that I think this is good that we're going to be able to do it in this structured way.
Yeah.
But cheers to number 2, man.
Amen. Well, yeah, let's jump in and just start thinking about like what is thought and what does it mean to think? I want to hear what you have to say first about it, but
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm just gonna be completely transparent. I wrote down something real quick, trying to kind of concise my thoughts, and it's in 2 parts. First is I put thinking is the means of rationalizing the underlying essence of cognition, imagination, experience, and reality. And then the second part is kind of just, going based off that again is processing abstraction as one interfaces cognitive awareness, the material world, and the essence of their being. So that, sense of just conscious awareness, their contact with the world outside of them, and then their contact with their inner person. So I think thinking is the process of analyzing that reality in our noggins.
I think we've seen the is it the degradation of thought, where now we don't even bother to slow down and think about what is thought. It's degraded so far to where we just assume that we know everything. We have such an infinite amount of knowledge and just media. I think words and media coming at us all the time. We just think we assume we know everything. We don't really stop to think about what is it that we're actually thinking about and processing through.
Yeah, it's such a good point too. And I think I think it's not only the fact that we're probably the most, only because we have the privilege to do this. Like I want to put that forth as well. Like even in our generation, I don't think we have experienced the hardships a lot of people have in just life, whether that be wars, famine, things of that nature. So we actually have the privilege to be narcissists. And so I say that because that means like there's so much surface level because we don't have to deal with the hardships. So we don't have to deal with the hard truths. And so I think we actually have to take the extra step to do that, not just to cognitively process life, but to actually ask the questions of why, or what is thought? Well, is it something? And just to break those things down, not everybody had technology back in the day. Not everybody had the quick access, just like you were mentioning. And I think it's super important to remember the responsibility that we have, even though we're kind of being thrown into this awareness, and we're, again, like you're saying, we're processing, we're realizing, we're analyzing all of these things. I think simultaneously we just focus upon how it affects us individually and don't look at the bigger picture, which is kind of what we're doing by asking this question. And I
Yeah.
think it's super important to highlight. um, how many people actually know their why? Like, how many people actually know the essence of who they are as a human? um, why we're thrown into this existence, or why we were created for this existence in this fixed point of history.
Yep.
Is it random? Is it strategic? Like, all of those things matter because they affect you individually, and they affect your perception of reality, even though reality is reality, as you're perceiving it.
Yeah. 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 And I think too, when we start to look at, you know, what thought is, where, like you're saying, like you're mentioning, we go into our being, and at the end of thought is the why. Um, and again, I think it just goes to show that many of us don't actually actively think. We are very passively thinking. We're very distracted in today's age, and we don't really dig into these. It's funny because they're deep and profound questions. You could say they're philosophical questions. The why, the what, the how. They're profound, yet they're so simple. Um, one word questions that open up um, a whole can of worms. You know,
Mm.
and the we've been kind of looking at some of the history of philosophy, and we see somebody like Socrates, who I don't know when, but it was, isn't that like pre what would you call that?
Pre-modernism.
Yeah, pre-modernism. They were just trying to figure out they were trying to figure out those basic questions to.
Yeah.
And so what Socrates ended up developing, I think it's like his most long-standing kind of contribution to philosophy, is the method in which people just come, sit down, talk, argue, possibly even, but do it with the end of actually trying to be proven wrong for the
Yeah.
purpose of growing towards truth. We want to be proven wrong so we can know what is right. You can't know truth until you know what's false. Um, and so, um, yeah, I think again that's something that we've lost. We've lost even the ability or the desire to sit down and to have a conversation and to be proven wrong. Um, it's we're in that the postmodern era, the postmodern age is so opinionated and so I don't even know if it's like defensive or what it is, but um, yeah, it's really unhealthy that we've come to a point where we can't even get to thinking deeply, let alone actually think deeply. There's not even an avenue in which people will go towards thinking deeply, let alone actually
Mm.
think deeply. So yeah.
And I think too, like, it's important, when we're talking about this, especially with post-modernity. I think it's important to recognize that the emphasis that everybody has right now, um, what they're talking about is so abstract. They don't know how to piece something together. And what I mean by that is it's so subjective that they feel like they can never know truly objective. And so that means it's strictly individual. And if it's strictly individual, how can you and I fully ever posit that we can even have the capacity to agree upon something?
Yeah.
um, Other than that it benefits both of us, really, at the base of it, because it's either that or us disagreeing means that we think there's a power play behind whatever the other person is thinking. And that's kind of the mindset of today. There's this elusive power play behind everything.
Yeah.
And it really, like, causes not only a tension and a friction, kind of like we see in the political spectrum of things, but I think too, with regards to where we're at as a society, it also produces, like you're saying, a laziness and we're all guilty of it, in one sense or another, because we have the luxury to. Um, it's easy in one sense, in a metaphorical way, I guess, or kind of alluding to an illustration. You know, it's easier to feed and to relax and to grow, in one sense, obese because of all of the information that we glean. In a actually rationalizing aspect of things. But I think too, with regards to actively thinking deeply, we don't exercise the extents of our mind. We're not being active with it. Not only in a life sense, because our behaviors portray what we believe and what we think, but also the way that our minds are processing things. Are we going back to, like you're saying, the history of breaking down these concepts, and then based off of that, seeing how things have developed over time? Because when you look at those things, there's not only a basis for good quality thinking, but now you're getting into what philosophy actually is. Even beyond what thought is, philosophy itself, a love of wisdom and a love of knowledge.
Mm,
um, and then where do we go based off of those questions? We're getting down to the essence of who we are, like you're saying. It's getting to the essence of what is the human story: who, what, when, where, why, how. All of these things are questions that kind of evidence a deeper resonance.
yeah. Yeah.
Really.
And, I guess we know why they're important. I think they're important
Yeah.
because without asking these questions, we fail to actually find purpose. Um,
Yeah.
if you do not ask these questions, um, purpose is never, I'm reiterating, but purpose is never actualized, and life becomes droll and meaningless and hopeless and
Yeah. Very nihilistic.
shapeless. You have no path in which to go. And so I think from my own experience, you know, I lived a life where I didn't ask these questions, and hedonism was without knowing it, the pursuit of pleasure became the why. It became the foundation in which I lived my life, and I would have to say that is, for the most part, every person's desire is to be satisfied, is to find pleasure. And the only way to, I think, even be worked out of that is, well, you have the Jordan Petersons, and you have these people that are philosophers, but all truth is God. All truth is God's truth. And so really you'll never come to a place where you can understand what truth is, um, until you know who God is. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah. Some and Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, you're good.
Um, I was just thinking too, like, and that's what it is, whether it's a Peterson or it's any of the past philosophers, at least that we've looked at this week. I think both of us individually and collectively would agree, that it really does entail this sense of there has to be something beyond me that I either align my thoughts to or my life to, or that either draws out the essence of what I am. And so to align yourself to that actually gives you a direction to which you then cultivate and structure your life so that you behave accordingly.
Yeah.
I know for us as a Christian, like, that reality is who God is through the work and the person of Jesus Christ. I know for Peterson, he's like an A to Y, not completely to Z in his thinking. And you see the framework going back to what thought actually is. Thought is this drawing off of, there's either a higher intellect or that I'm creating with my mind. And those are like the two defaults of perception, and
Yeah.
really getting down to, you
You
know,
either are God, or there is a God.
yeah, no, in essence, yeah, for sure, because it's you're either fabricating the things in your own mind, in your own capacity, and you're limited to that because, again, individual perception. We see colors differently, we taste food, and that might be a different experience again. but again, that's because it's marred potential. It's not God who is his actuated self, kind of like Aristotle was positing. God is pure potentia. He's the unchanging variable. Obviously, Aristotle didn't believe in the Christian God in that sense,
Yeah.
but it is true. I think that's something that a lot of the church fathers drew off of to develop and cultivate the doctrine of simplicity, that God just simply is. And then our realization and discovery of who he is based upon the work of the Spirit and the revelation of the word is, you know, key to us understanding a little bit more of what that means.
Yeah.
Because we're finite. So to understand the infinite, it's fragmented. So I have to take piece by piece. It's not necessarily a one and done from our vantage, though the work is, complete in God's faithfulness, and in that sense. But yeah, I think to I was gonna ask you a question based off of the idea of what is thought. When you hear that, what what is what is it, or rather, what is it not? Because if we're saying what is, that implies that it is something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was curious to see what you would kind of come up with that. Obviously, we've kind of defined it in terms, but kind of like even seeing if we can break this barrier of like what is the essence of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think thought is not something insofar as um, it's not physically tangible. Like thought isn't a being, and because it's conceptual, it's metaphysical. Um, what it is not is thought is not actually reality. Thought is, I would say, thought is more potential. Thought is something that is given, and our thoughts are not our own. I don't think we necessarily, and this is starting to creep into some murky water, but we don't necessarily manufacture our own thoughts. They are, I would say that thoughts are the combination of our observation of and perception of reality that we, I guess, in turn is cultivated in our mind to observation and perception of reality cultivated as we analyze ultimately, I don't know, like for the purpose of knowing, because knowing is being, and you can't, and we have to believe that we're alive, because if we don't believe that we're alive, then we'll never know that we're alive. Like if I don't believe that I'm thinking, if I don't believe that I'm breathing, then I can't know it if I don't believe it.
Starting to get into monism, where he's all like, you can understand something by understanding what it's not. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
like,
you have to though. Yeah, and yeah, so if thought is metaphysical, if it's other, and if it's given, and we know that we can't fully come to grips with it, then um, there has to be something that's outside of us that's giving it to us if we're not creating it, because everything that has being, and or everything that is a part of reality is given or created by something other than, if you want to say that the words that I'm speaking are something, then I'm creating those words. But even then, I'm not myself necessarily creating my thoughts. They're more a combination of the observation of life and something, I don't know, something outside of myself, something metaphysical that is combining with that. And it's the soul. I think it's the soul, but that's just one of those things we can't fully understand. We just have to lean
Yeah.
on God,
Well,
just trusting in Him.
yeah. I think it's important to the sense of renewing your mind, right? Um, I think the mind is something that is meant to be cultivated in light of truth or something that is already there. And I think kind of with what I wrote, I'll just repeat it just so that, use the audience understand and we can kind of wrestle with it too. I wrote, thinking is the means of rationalizing the underlying essence of cognition, imagination, experience, and reality. So it is the processing of what's already there. In my understanding of it, it's the processing of what, as I like you're saying, has been given, or what is already there. But I'm also not trying to sneak into a David Hume scenario where I say, well, it's just my perception. You know,
Yeah.
I
But
think
the funny thing is, I can't remember who it is, and I'm sure there's a scripture that backs this up. But one of the original philosophers is known for giving this story. I think it might be Plato's cave or something like that.
That's a secular and an ancient secular doctrine of illumination. So how does Augustine's doctrine of illumination, and just for our listeners, the cave is, man, I've tried to compress my explanation of the cave to so concise, and I can never do it.
Yep.
You're in a cave, you're chained to, you're looking at a wall, you're seeing shadows on that wall. There's a fire behind you that's casting those shadows. People are putting puppets up in front of that fire that are casting the shadows you see. You think those shadows are the reality. Somebody unchains you. You go out into the world. You see, if you saw a shadow of a horse, now you see a real horse.
Yeah.
Well, the way that you get out is through reason. That's how you unchain yourself. And then ultimately what you do is you look at the sun, and that is thought thinking itself. That's
yeah, it's the outworking of illumination in the sense of like actually understanding and working, because Plato works from the chains and bondage to the shadows to an actual horse outside of the cave, to not just the shadow of a horse but an actual horse, to the light of the sun, to the sun itself, which is supposed to be the essence of illumination
Yeah.
and understanding. And I think that we can relate that to the glory of who Christ is, because he has shown himself upon our hearts, right? Without the illumination of the Spirit, I don't think we have a true understanding, because 1 Corinthians 2, the Spirit of God reveals the deep things of God.
Yeah.
The spirit of man only understands the things of man, and the things of the Spirit are foolishness to him. It's like our comprehension of the things of God, like, are of God. Like, that's a miracle.
Yeah.
In and of itself. Yeah, and man, this is such a good thing to think about. And I say that, right, thinking about it, but it's such a good thing to do, because we're not just taking concepts and saying, all right, let's just pontificate days on end about these things, but we're trying to get down to the bedrock of the importance of thinking and true application, truly understanding our why, truly understanding our purpose, as Aristotle would say, our telos, our to like a chair was made for sitting. What was man made for?
Mhm.
So I think that's what thought is intended for. It's intended for the beauty of life and discovery and experience and
Mhm.
all of these things. But as you're rationalizing and outworking those things, they should literally outwork themselves, right? Just like it says in John, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us.
Mhm.
And I think that's what, as far as a Christian perspective would go, that's kind of the conclusion we come to. It's finding your why. It's aligning yourself to that purpose, as a cause worth dying for. And then once you find why it's worth dying for, pursue that end at the expense of
For your own life.
should death.
Yeah.
Should death take you? Nevertheless, you stood for that cause. And so I think that's what every human is faced with. in some sense. So I think that's where thought kind of segues into. And I think that's why it's important to think about these things. And I think too, like just kind of thinking of a means for our audience, a means of application. I think it's important to highlight the reality of thinking. It's important to highlight the cultivation of thoughts so that we can cultivate, the truth of things, so that we're able to align ourselves to those things. And then I think the challenge for all of us this week then is to think of our why. What is our why? Finding out the nuances of that, like you mentioned, the Socratic method, taking what we think or know to be true and breaking it down to its why, breaking it down to the bedrock of what it is, because from that will derive our purpose. From that will derive the means by which we process life, and the filter, if you will, of exactly what we are seeking to step into as we're growing. As our mind is growing, we are growing. We are in process. We are in transit to being cultivated to those things. So I think really the challenge is for this week is really to think about the essence of who we are and our purpose.
Yeah.
And to recognize that thought is the gift. Therefore, we have the responsibility by that means to further cultivate the truth so that our lives are aligned with that truth.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. And if you don't think, you don't have purpose. And if you don't think and you don't truly seek truth at all costs, willing to be wrong for the sake of being right, then you'll never find purpose.
Well, and I think if you're at that place, if you genuinely think you're at that place, you also have to come to grips with the law of contradiction at that point, because what you're saying then is that is a truth. That is the place that you have arrived to, and that's a fatalistic perspective. I think there's a ton more, and there is so much opportunity. Obviously, I think Ethan and I would love to discuss things further with that. Like DM us, like whatever, because I think we all as humans wrestle with those realities as well. I think we wrestle with the sense, and that's kind of, if you read Ecclesiastes, that's kind of the reality of what the writer and the preacher gets into.
Yeah, that's good. Right on. Well, as we end, I just wanted to plug the Anchor website in which the podcast is found. And I say this because if you actually go there, instead of leaving comments, you can actually, I'm pretty sure you can leave voice messages.
Oof.
In which we will be able to listen to what you have to say. I don't know how long a voice message you can leave, but we'd love feedback. This is our second episode. We're trying really hard to just make these like authentic conversations. So forgive us when we ramble a little bit. If you've stuck with us to the end, thank you for doing that. And go leave a voice message. We want to hear it. And quite possibly, I'm pretty sure we can feature them in our episodes and we can even talk about them. So it'd be so cool if we could just do more interaction with our friends, family, and anybody else who's listening. Just get some input and include you, the listener, in the verbal process with us. Gary, thank you for listening. Thank you for giving your input, man. I'm still wrestling with this stuff like a little bit.
Same, dude. I just love it. I love talking with you, brother, and I love the opportunity that we have here to think about these things and challenge each other and to wrestle through it together. Two heads are better than one. So,
right on. Well, until next time, try to find your mind. We're gonna try to find ours because I think I might have lost it. Right on. Grace and peace.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Verbal Process. We hope that you were inspired and encouraged by the dialogue that you just heard. Please tune in on a weekly consistency for updated dialogues and content. You can find us on social media, on YouTube, or any of the major podcast platforms. And we hope that in all of your discovery, you process well.
Maybe I can find it if I try to stop looking in other places to cover traces of other cages. I'm way, way weaker than I was the other day, but nobody knew I was above the wave. Peter, who drowned and who